Good afternoon. The subcommittee will come to order. Thank you all for being here today for the first hearing of the Subcommittee on Technology Modernization. I would first like to thank Chairman Rowe for entrusting me with this responsibility. I have spent much of the past 2 months studying VA's EHR modernization and the Military Health System Genesis program and meeting the people working on both of those efforts. I never expected that electronic health records would be such a major part of my service in the House of Representatives. However, I do appreciate the central role they play in the quality of healthcare delivery to every service member, veteran, and practically every citizen in this country. I am also well aware of the stakes. EHR modernization is inextricably linked to VA's ongoing reform efforts. If successful, it will be one of the linchpins of a more responsive, agile, and efficient VA. If mismanaged, I fear a daunting and disappointing setback. That is why the subcommittee is so important. Very rarely has a body of the Congress been dedicated to oversight of one program from its inception. Far too often, we only take an interest in a government project when it has already become a public scandal. This time must be much different. I commit to digging into the details and asking the difficult questions. I commit to bringing the EHR modernization into public view. VA is asking veterans to invest their trust and all taxpayers to invest a huge amount of their dollars. The public deserves to know what is happening. I would also like to thank Ranking Member Lamb for being my partner in this effort. We intend to set an example for how well bipartisan oversight can work, even in 2018 when we dispense with petty political games. Sometimes a big government bureaucracy is like a freight train lumbering down the tracks. The course may become dangerous, and the people driving the train may even realize it, but the track was expensive and to set, and no one wants to alter it. Sometimes that train, that bureaucracy, needs some external help to course correct. That is this subcommittee's role. VA's EHR modernization is still at the beginning of the beginning, but a great deal has happened since June 26, this committee's last hearing on the subject. More is known now. We know there will be disputes within the VA and other agencies. We know leadership is crucial to resolve those disputes. We also know the EHR modernization must be people-centric. The system must be designed from the bottom up and reflect what veterans and healthcare providers actually need. We have learned so many lessons from MHS Genesis' early mistakes. There is a great deal, though, that we still do not know. We do not know if in any significant level of detail, what will happen and when in VA's EHR modernization. We do not know precisely how the Cerner Millennium system will be structured and configured. The department is still deep in its planning to flesh out its schedule and fill in those blanks. Vista, other systems, and VHA's processes are tightly interconnected. Once the changes begin, we do not know what disruptions may result. We also do not know what possibilities the future holds. The EHR modernization promises native interoperability and data, reams of clinical data to make veterans' health care more effective. It is important to take time and plan how to harness that. We are here today to discuss specifically the role of the Interagency Program Office. What is the IPO and why does it matter? VA's EHR modernization and the Defense Health Agency's MHS Genesis program must succeed together. That requires cooperation. There will be debates, sometimes disagreements, and decisions that must be made. There will be countless actions every single day which must be coordinated between the two programs. Who makes sure all of that happens? Personalities will change, but what is the constant? Maybe the two agencies work together seamlessly at all times, maybe not. If not, Congress expects the IPO to bridge the gaps. Congress created the IPO in the 2008 NDAA to act as the single point of accountability for DoD and VA to rapidly develop and implement EHR systems or capabilities to achieve full interoperability. The single point of accountability. The IPO has been many things over the past 10 years. A coordinating body for standards, the builder of an integrated EHR system, which was quickly abandoned, a contributor to the Joint Legacy Viewer, and the facilitator of interoperability when the two departments decided to modernize their EHR systems separately. But the IPO has never truly been the single point of accountability. After trying practically everything else under the sun over the past 10 years, VA and DoD have come to the last remaining, hopefully best solution to implement the same commercial EHR. This is exactly what the IPO was intended for. The question is, though, after so many twists and turns over the years and the expansions and contractions of its mission, whether the IPO is up to the task. And if not, how do we make it up to the task? With that, I yield to Ranking Member Lamb for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also would like to thank Chairman Banks and Dr. Rowe as well for how well they have worked with me and my staff as we get started here. To use Mr. Banks' analogy, my focus is on the passengers on that train. The veterans themselves have to remain our primary focus. They need to get where they're going in a timely and safe manner, and everything that we do here will be about making sure that their care is at the highest standard of health care worldwide, and that's what this project needs to serve. So along the way, we should do whatever it takes to get them to the destination, whether it's change course or lighten the load or add additional fuel or hire new engineers. Whatever it is has to be on the table so that we can get the mission accomplished. This committee, in my brief experience in Congress, has lived up to its reputation as the last frontier of bipartisanship in Congress. And that's largely thanks, I think, to Dr. Rowe's leadership. He has established a culture in this committee that I am very proud to be part of, and I think that you'll see that reflected in the work of this subcommittee as well. So thank you very much to you gentlemen. I think that this project has great promise, and in addition to the care of our veterans, we need to focus on accountability. That's something that I've seen can be difficult to track in an agency as large and complex as VA, but I know we can do it, and I know there are some great people there trying to do the job. I want to thank Mr. Wyndham for already meeting with my staff to lay out some of the organizational chart. And just like you would at the start of any military mission, I think part of our goal here today is to establish exactly who is accountable for what part of the mission and how quickly they will be able to get that done. So with that, I am ready to begin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Lamb. I now would like to welcome our first and only panel who are seated at the witness table. On the panel, we have the Director of the Interagency Program Office, Dr. Lauren Thompson, representing the Department of Defense. She is accompanied by the Deputy Director of the Interagency Program Office, Dr. Helga Rippin, representing the Department of Veteran Affairs. We also have Mr. John Wyndham, the Acting Chief Health Information Officer and Program Executive Officer for the Office of EHR Modernization in the Department of Veteran Affairs. Finally, we have Ms. Carol Harris, the Director of IT Acquisition Management Issues at the Government Accountability Office. As will be the subcommittee's practice, I ask the witnesses to please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you, and let the record reflect that all witnesses have answered in the affirmative. You may be seated, and Dr. Thompson, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Rowe, Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Lamb, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm honored to represent the Department of Defense as the Director of the DoD VA Interagency Program Office. And I'm accompanied, as you mentioned, by Dr. Helga Rippin, the VA Executive in our office as the Deputy Director of the Interagency Program Office. The mission of the IPO is to lead and coordinate the adoption of and contribution to national health data standards to ensure interoperability across the DoD, the VA, and private sector healthcare providers. The DoD and VA represent two of our nation's largest health systems. Providing high-quality health care to service members, veterans, and their families is one of the IPO's highest priorities, and health data interoperability is essential to improving the care delivered. The IPO is a collaborative entity comprised of staff from both the DoD and the VA who have technical expertise in health data standards and interoperability. The IPO serves as a central resource for the DoD and VA, monitoring industry best practices and providing technical guidance to facilitate health data exchange. IPO team members work closely with the Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology in the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as with standards development organizations such as Health Level 7 and others to support the identification, implementation, and evolution of national standards associated with both the DoD and VA EHRs. These activities are vital to providing the building blocks for interoperability across the departments. In April 2016, the departments, with the IPO's support, met a requirement of the fiscal year 2014 National Defense Authorization Act, certifying to Congress that their systems were interoperable with an integrated display of data. Currently, the departments share more than 1.5 million data elements daily. More than 415,000 DoD and VA clinicians are able to view real-time data of more than 16 million patients who have received care in the DoD and the VA through the Joint Legacy Viewer. The IPO plays an important role in monitoring DoD and VA interoperability efforts as well. The IPO established a health data interoperability metrics dashboard to identify department-specific targets for transactional metrics and trends, which are routinely shared with Congress. The IPO has also implemented the recommendations of the Government Accountability Office regarding outcome-oriented metrics to provide a basis for assessing and reporting on interoperability progress. We work collaboratively with the departments on this. The IPO also serves as a focal point for collaboration across DoD and VA in their EHR modernization efforts. The IPO has been actively supporting the departments with the development of a governance process to enable them to make joint decisions regarding common aspects of EHR. The IPO will facilitate the governance process, provide expertise and guidance in implementing best practices, and capture artifacts needed for decision-making. DoD and VA are working to further enhance interoperability through the implementation of the same electronic health record system. The IPO will continue to work with the departments as well as the Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology and industry partners to ensure that collectively we are advancing interoperability throughout the healthcare industry. Enabling health information exchange and interoperability between EHR systems across DoD, VA, and private sector will serve as the foundation for patient-centered healthcare, seamless care transitions, and improved care for our service members, veterans, and their families. The IPO remains committed to this mission. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the IPO and the ongoing work of the DoD and VA in regards to their modernization efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Mr. Wyndham, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Lamb, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Dr. Rowe, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the VA's effort to modernize our electronic health record, commonly referred to as an EHR. First, I want to take the time to personally thank each of the members of the subcommittee for your ongoing and really unwavering support of EHRM. Without your support, VA would not be able to move forward on this critical initiative. The department is committed to providing the best care for our nation's veterans, especially access to complete medical record. The new EHR system will improve access to quality care and enable the seamless transfer of health data as service members transition from the active duty to veteran status. On June 5, 2017, VA announced its decision to replace Vista, its legacy system which is unsustainable and cannot deliver critical capabilities to meet the evolving needs of the healthcare market. Through this decision, VA is working to adopt the same EHR solution as the Department of Defense, allowing patient data to reside in a single hosting site, utilizing a single common system. The ultimate outcome of this initiative will enable the sharing of health information, improve care, delivery, and coordination, and provide clinicians with data and tools support patient safety. VA took several additional steps to ensure this acquisition meets the needs of the veterans and the clinicians who care for our veterans, while also being a good steward of the taxpayers' dollars by capitalizing on DoD synergies. VA conducted an interoperability assessment and worked with leading healthcare organizations who recently implemented new EHR systems. These steps were critical in identifying and reducing potential gaps in VA's EHR contract. On May 17, 2018, VA awarded a contract to Cerner to leverage an existing commercial solution to achieve interoperability within VA, between VA and DoD, and between VA and community care providers. This contract contains the necessary conditions fostering innovation and evolving commercial technologies. VA also awarded the first 3 task orders that include project management, IOC site assessments, and data hosting. I want to highlight these important aspects of the EHR modernization effort, which will contribute to the overall success of the program. First, VA's implementation strategy will take several years to deploy and will be an evolving process as technology advances. VA's approach involves deploying the solution at IOC sites to identify problems and correct them before deploying to additional sites. The IOC sites will further hone governance, configuration management, and solidify processes overall. Secondly, VA has developed a change management strategy that involves users in the field earlier in the process to determine their needs and quickly alleviate concerns. Furthermore, EHRM has established clinical councils that include nurses, doctors, and other end users from the field to support configuration of workflows. Finally, VA and DoD are working closely together to advance transparency through governance from an interagency decision-making perspective through the DoD-VA Interagency Program Office. The department's leadership, including myself, meets at least monthly to verify working group strategies and course correct if necessary. By learning from DoD, VA will be able to proactively address challenges and further reduce potential risk at VA's IOC sites. As challenges arise throughout the deployment, VA will work urgently to mitigate the impact of veterans' health care. VA established a program office to provide oversight to the new EHR implementation. The office is staffed with the appropriate functional, technical, and subject matter experts to enforce adherence to cost, schedule, and performance objectives, as well as quality objectives. This transformation will support the department's effort to modernize the VA's health systems and ensure VA is a source of pride for our veterans, beneficiaries, employees, and taxpayers. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my opening statements. I am happy to answer any questions that you or the members of the subcommittee may have. And again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Windham. Ms. Harris, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Lamb, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting us to testify today on DoD and VA's Interagency Program Office and its role in VA's Electronic Health Record Modernization Program. As requested, I'll briefly summarize our prior work on the establishment and evolution of the IPO over the last decade. As you know, VA and DoD operate 2 of the nation's largest healthcare systems, which provide coverage to millions of veterans and active duty service members and their beneficiaries. Both departments have long recognized the need for shared health information systems and capabilities, the benefits of which include making patient information more readily available and reducing medical mistakes. To this end, the IPO was established by law to act as a single point of accountability for DoD and VA system interoperability efforts. Unfortunately, this office has not come close to fulfilling this objective. Between 2008 and 2010, we issued a series of reports detailing how VA and DoD have not yet fully executed their plan to set up the IPO. For example, key leadership positions were either vacant or being filled on an interim basis, and the office was not yet carrying out critical IT management responsibilities in the areas of performance measurement, project planning, and schedule. Accordingly, we recommended, among other controls, the IPO develop a project plan and detailed integrated master schedule. And while the departments agreed with the recommendation, their subsequent actions were incomplete and the IPO remained ineffectual. In 2009, the IPO was rechartered and assigned responsibility for establishing a virtual lifetime electronic record for service members and veterans. In February 2011, we reported that the office had not developed an approved integrated master schedule, master program plan, or performance metrics for this initiative. We noted, if these deficiencies were not corrected, VA and DoD's ability to effectively deliver capabilities to support their joint health IT needs would be uncertain. As such, we recommended that the departments address these management weaknesses. The departments agreed with the recommendation, but did not take action, and thus the IPO's ability to effectively deliver this initiative continued to be hampered. In March 2011, the Secretaries of VA and DoD committed the two departments to developing a common integrated electronic health record system. To oversee this new effort, in October 2011, the IPO was rechartered yet again to give it increased authority and expanded responsibilities for leading the integrated system effort. However, in February 2013, VA and DoD abandoned their plans for the system. We reported on this decision and found that the departments had not addressed management barriers for effective collaboration on their joint health IT efforts. Among other things, VA and DoD did not provide the IPO with controls over essential resources, such as funding and staffing. In addition, the departments diffused the responsibility for achieving integrated health records, thus undermining the office's intended role as a single point of accountability. We recommended that the departments ensure the IPO has authority over dedicated resources, developing interagency processes, and making decisions over the department's interoperability efforts. Again, the departments agreed with the recommendation, but no action was taken. In June 2017, the VA announced that it planned to acquire the same commercial electronic health record system that DoD has been acquiring. VA has since established a program management office and drafted high-level plans for governance of the electronic health record implementation. Program officials have noted the governance bodies will not be finalized until next month, and the officials have not yet indicated what role, if any, the IPO is to have in the governance process. As such, we are recommending that VA clearly define the role and responsibilities of the IPO within the governance plans for acquisition of the new system. Because the IPO has historically been ineffective in increasing interoperability, and the VA has largely ignored our previous recommendations, the department has made limited progress. In order for VA to successfully acquire the same system as DoD, the department must expeditiously and effectively implement this recommendation. That concludes my statement. I look forward to addressing your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. The written statements of Dr. Thompson and Ms. Harris will be entered into the hearing record. Mr. Wyndham was unable to submit written testimony for this hearing. We will now proceed to questioning, and I yield to myself to begin questioning. To start with, Mr. Wyndham, I have to start by asking you about the leadership turnover in the Office of EHR Modernization. You might recall that this was my first question for the full committee's June EHR hearing, so I hope this isn't becoming somewhat of a pattern moving forward. But in the immediate aftermath of Ms. Morris's resignation on August 24, you were appointed the acting Chief Health Information Officer in her place. Our understanding at that time was VA intended to conduct a search to fill the position and that you would at some point return to your previous role as Program Executive Officer. Has that changed?
Sir, I've been with the effort since its inception, including in uniform, as part of the drafting of the determination and findings that drove this process. So I've been with the VA for approximately 17 months in and out of uniform. The departure of Genevieve Morris really impacted no continuity issues within our office. The Deputy Secretary who recently has come on board and I've been interacting with daily we're assessing the overall organizational structure. From our perspective, we feel like we have no gaps in leadership. We have the full support of VHA and OINT in augmenting the present OEHRM, Office of Electronic Health Record Modernization, and therefore we feel like we, at this point in time, have no gaps in leadership or in subject matter expertise. I'm was more than involved in the day-to-day operations for the past 17 months, even as Genevieve Morse assumed the helm for approximately 1 month. So, sir, I guess I would offer to you that we expect turnover. That's kind of the way things go in not only in the federal space, but in the normal commercial workspace, and that, you know, we wish Genevieve Morse the best. And in the same vein, you know, our chief medical officer who departed, again, family, wanted to be on the West Coast. We have Dr. Laura Krupa, who immediately stepped in from the CMIO role into the CMO role. She's been with us for 17 months, fully understands the requirements. Again, we kind of pride ourselves on no single points of failure, people being willing and ready to step up. So, sir, that's where that would be what I offer as a response.
Appreciate that. Mr. Wyndham, as well, the Office of EHR Modernization has a Chief Medical Officer position and a Chief Technology Officer position. In other words, a physician executive and a general IT executive. Health informatics is somewhat different. It blends the two competencies. Do you believe it is valuable to have a health informaticist as the leader or one of the leaders at your office?
Yes, sir, absolutely. I think the use of the word leader is the critical piece. I pride myself on knowing what I don't know and knowing what I do know. And we've got an incredible subject matter base throughout the VA portfolio for me to access, including support contracts in Booz Allen Hamilton and other access to other consultants where we can draw in the expertise on a moment's notice.
So with that, is there anyone working in the Office of EHR Modernization who has managed a EHR implementation in a large health system to its completion?
Sir, we have subject matter experts that are being provided to us by Booz Allen Hamilton as part of our support contract that are delivering, who have done just what you've captured, which is work in EHR implementation from start to finish. And so I'm comfortable with the support we have from the commercial environment. So that is a yes. Okay. Do we have that expertise on the government side? I would offer limited.
Okay. All right. Mr. Wyndham, your position in MHS Genesis in the Defense Health Management Systems Modernization Office was as the program manager. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay. And when did you hold that position?
I held it from October 2013 through, I departed in November/December of 2000 and my years are running together. I'm getting old. 2015. So okay. Approximately 3 years, sir.
So what were, can you tell us then, what were some of the other leadership positions at MHS Genesis in addition to that one?
My primary position was the program manager.
So what were some other positions that existed?
I'm sorry, sir. Would you please repeat?
Within the organization.
Well, we've had chief engineer, we had system engineers, we've had testing leads, obviously a functional lead, chief medical officer. We had a technical lead and a CIO/engineer, system engineer. We had no role called a CHIO, Chief Health Informatics Officer. That seems to be an evolving role in the commercial.
I don't mean to cut you off. Before I yield to the ranking member, do you believe the Chief Health Information Officer position is necessary and beneficial? Yes or no?
I have been unable to find in any implementations in the commercial the naming of a Chief Health Informatics Officer. I find that skill set is offered from our CMIO community and from our informatics community in general. So to answer your question, I believe that the leadership role is the fundamental and most important element of this, bringing together the requisite expertise to deliver to the mission.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield to Ranking Member Lamb for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wyndham, who do you believe is the person within VA who is primarily accountable for the success of this project?
Sir, my ego would say me, but reality is the DepSec, Mr. Jim Byrne. I report to him as mandated by the various elements from congressional mandates regarding who should oversee the funding of this project. So my ego, my accountability, in reality, his accountability, and I think that relationship supports that.
Thank you. Now, could you just tell me succinctly, what do you view as the role of the IPO when it comes to the actual successful implementation of this project?
The IPO, sir, is I think the facilitator between DOD and VA. When I say that, I mean clearly DOD has a mission set of requirements. VA has a mission set of requirements. It's impossible as we execute our day-to-day operations to be absolutely aware of what's going on in the DOD portfolio, and I believe vice versa. I think the importance of the IPO is that they do have the visibility into both portfolios and therefore can facilitate or bridge the gaps of understanding between the organizations and to ensure that we are aware and in tune as to what, if you will, are problems that are being encountered, lessons learned being shared, things along that line. So I would offer a facilitator between the two organizations in support of overall success, mission success for both organizations.
And so it sounds like you view it as, and this is just a yes or no question so I can move on, do you view it mainly as their responsibility to provide information to you?
I believe it's not only information, but also consult, guidance as appropriate, and also recommendations and, if you will, endorsement of good ideas.
Okay.
So the full spectrum, sir.
Do you believe that the IPO has decision-making authority over you with respect to any aspect of this project?
I do not believe that.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Thompson, same question for you. Can you just define for me very succinctly what you view the role of the IPO to be in this project?
Thank you for the question, sir. The IPO serves in a convening role, a coordinating role. We facilitate the information sharing from the experiences of the DoD's MHS Genesis deployment at initial sites to the VA, and conversely, information from the VA as their program is being developed to share with the DoD. We do, as I had indicated in my opening statement, we have been working in collaboration with both departments, been developing a process for governing how decisions will get made as they arise, where there are when decisions need to be made regarding the common electronic health record. That is a role that has evolved since the VA made their announcement to purchase the same system as the DoD.
But do you think that you have the decision-making authority to establish how that governance structure looks, or would you agree with Mr. Wyndham that you're basically making recommendations to both entities?
At this point in time, we make recommendations. We do not have the decision-making authority.
Okay, thank you. Now, Ms. Harris, having heard both of those answers, can you fill us in the time remaining? Do you think that there's a further definition of IPO that needs to happen, or are there shortcomings in what we've heard here today? Well,
according to the law, the IPO is supposed to be the single point of accountability, so that would include responsibility, authority, and decision-making responsibilities. So I think that what they responded to is in conflict with the expectations set out by law.
And would you agree that, as of right now, it appears that we lack a single accountable individual person or group who will be accountable for the joint success of this project, meaning the actual interoperability that we're trying to achieve between the two agencies?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. I now yield to the full committee chairman of the House Veteran Affairs Committee, Dr. Phil Rowe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to do a little history lesson here, and then we'll go with questions. I remember sitting here, and I think maybe Mr. Coughlin was here, when we spent $1 billion of the taxpayers' money to try to get Vista and Alta to speak to each other, and it was a failure. And I think that's was astonishing to me that we could get rid of $1 billion and accomplish not anything. That was several years ago, and you all went through, Mr. Wyndham went through the chronology as Ms. Thompson did. I don't want to do that again. When Secretary Panetta and Shinseki sat right at that dais and said we failed, We then, I think the decision was made by the DOD and then our previous VA secretary to move on and try to have the same system. I thought that was a good decision that was made. One of the things that I'm going to get into, and I think it's very important what both the ranking member and the chairman have said, is about who's in charge. Who's in charge of this thing. And I'm going to quote Yogi Berra: "If you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else." And that's my fear, that we don't have somebody in charge, that's going to happen. And so we need to establish that this today when we leave here, who can the chairman and the ranking member contact when they need to know something about this program. I took I've implemented an electronic health record system, and it is difficult. In every VA hospital I go to, I try to explain to them that this, and talk to the people and to veterans, that this is going to be hard, and you got to be patient with the providers and with the hospital when this implementation takes place. And I know from our visit out at Fairchild and Madigan, and I know the chairman's been out there, it was less than smooth, to be kind. And Mr. Wyndham, you mentioned anytime you put EHRs in, it slows you down. There's no question about it. I found myself sitting at 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, entering data in a computer for my day's work. A really fun thing to be doing. And I know you mentioned here that you would look at a hit of 10%. I think you're going to have to look, if you look at Madigan, a much bigger hit in productivity than that. It slowed them down initially 50%. And they had to hire a number of people to get up to speed. And one of my concerns is all this at this 30,000-foot level is fine, but there's a nurse and a doctor and healthcare people out there that are seeing a patient. And if they hit a blind canyon, what do they do? Because there's 6 other people waiting to see them right then. And apparently what happened with the when DOD was putting this out, they had to call a number here in D.C., and, it was 1-800-HOLE, and we'll get back to you, and there are 1,000 people in front of you. And yet there's a provider out there that they were fearful that they would put inaccurate data in and so forth and actually harm patients. Can we be assured that the training, and what I found out was I didn't care about all that. What I cared about, can I negotiate this electronic system and get this data in there accurately, because after I'm long gone, somebody's going to be looking at this data and making clinical decisions based on a patient's well-being. Can we be assured that there will be adequate? Cerner has been in our office. Can we be assured that there will be help there for those providers? And have we talked to those providers instead of putting a top-down approach? Have we found out what they want and what works at their hospital after this initial rollout in Bremerton? And Dr. Thompson, you or Mr. Wyndham, either one can take those questions.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. The 10% number, I'm not sure. We have articulated, I think, at various aspects, anywhere from 10 to 50%, understanding that there are inefficiencies introduced by business transformations, and our job is to be preemptive and proactive. And I think we are, with the support of VHA, in making sure that we have strategies that augment the workforces that are there as part of our implementation strategies. I think that's a key element, and we will continue to monitor those. Yes, sir.
No, I'll tell you what really, when I was at Fairchild, what really got me was they had taken a year to put 10,000 healthy people in. VA have healthy people, but most of them are not. And what the data that was entered into the record was very basic data, and you had to use the Joint Legacy Viewer to get into the weeds. And we need, in other words, we were going to have to run that system parallel until, I guess, for 70 years or 90 years, until every veteran who went in there was gone. And I thought, well, that's a disaster if we've got to run 2 systems to be able to have an EHR. That defeats the purpose of it. So can we be assured that all of that data will be moved onto one system, so that at one point in time we can cut the lights off on the old and be totally beholden to the new one, with that data backed up and shared somewhere?
Yes, sir. It is our intent to migrate all data into the Healthy Intent platform that Cerner manages. We will have complete access to data and still own the data. So that's absolutely our strategy. I think you've hit the nail on the head in a myriad of ways, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said this is hard. And so we are going to continue to leverage our partnership with DOD. We're going to continue to learn from that, and we're going to continue to do the absolute best we can not to impact that important care being delivered to our veterans. So I can't disagree with any of your remarks, sir, other than we're learning by the day, and we're going to continue to develop our implementation and integration strategies to minimize that impact on our veterans and on the clinicians that serve our veterans. So
I'll yield back, and
Yes,
hopefully we'll have a second round.
Thank you, Chairman Rowe. I now yield 5 minutes to Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to be having our first Technology Modernization Subcommittee hearing today. I'm sorry I'm covering 2 hearings, so I wasn't able to catch all the testimony. But I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues here and make sure that veterans remain the priority throughout the project. I've spent my first 2 terms on the Armed Services Committee. This is my 3rd term, and I'm honored to serve on the Veterans Committee. One of the things I always wondered, and lay people always wondered, was why you would have 2 electronic health records for that set of people. Every single veteran comes from the Department of Defense. So we scratched our head about this, and we all understood there was kind of a standoff between the DOD and the VA in terms of how they wanted to approach it. So I recognize that the IPO, the Interagency Program Office, provides an important role in sharing information, but I think Mr. Lamb's questioning showed pretty clearly that there's really no one there to break the ties or resolve the differences. And it seems to me that the same kinds of differences, whether they're cultural or historical, exist today as they did when I came in. I guess my question for Ms. Thompson, or Dr. Thompson, is you had mentioned that the IPO, the DOD, and the VA plan to set up governance bodies to oversee the effort. What would those look like? And how are the bodies different from the current process? And I'm going to ask Ms. Harris to address the same issue, what you think it should look like. Dr. Thompson?
Thank you for the question. So first, let me point out that there are existing joint governance bodies in place today, and we intend to use those bodies to the extent that we can. What we are proposing as new bodies are specific to making decisions about the configuration of the electronic health record that will be implemented at the sites in both departments. What we are proposing are 3 bodies: a joint functional governance board, a joint technical governance board, and a joint decision-making board. The premise of the governance is that the decisions are made at the lowest level possible. We have clinicians working together side by side today, technical experts working side by side today to help determine the path forward and solve problems. When they cannot agree, then only at that point would a decision be escalated to respectively either a functional governance board or technical governance board. And we fully believe that those bodies will be able to come to agreement, and only if they can't would those decisions then be escalated to a decision board, which would be comprised of those in the departments with the authority to make decisions regarding the configuration of the electronic health record.
Ms. Harris?
Sir, I think based on the IPO's past history, I think it's evident that they never had the clout to either mediate and resolve the issues between VA and DOD as it relates to interoperability. So I think when it comes to the law itself of having a single point of accountability, the IPO was never set up to succeed there because neither of the departments were willing to relinquish control.
Right.
I think in terms of what you would see in leading organizations, what they have shown based on our past work is that you have a single executive level entity that is the point of accountability. And it's just one body as opposed to multiple bodies. And it has to be at that executive level. So that's something that we would expect to see, moving forward when VA and DOD establish their joint governance. Certainly, I would expect to see it at a minimum at the deputy secretary level, VA's deputy secretary and his counterpart at the DOD leading this joint executive entity.
Do you anticipate that the joint effort would actually have new decision-making authority that would bind both agencies?
That would, in order to be the single point of accountability, they would have to have decision-making authority in order to be able to arbitrate issues and make decisions so that if compromises are necessary, that they have the authority to make those decisions. That's essential.
And is that something that we've seen in other agencies? Is there a model for this that we can borrow?
Unfortunately, we've never seen it work well when we've seen these joint collaborative efforts. I mean, there's a reason IT is difficult, and certainly, you know, when you're talking about the two largest healthcare networks in the nation, I mean, it compounds that complexity.
Well, however, I'm out of time, but I would just offer that either the president has to do this or the Congress has to do this, because I don't think this thing gets created without some action by us. And the only person that both agencies report to now is the President of the United States. And I think also Congress would have a role in creating such an agency as well. So I think look forward to the coming work. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I now yield 5 minutes to Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Harris, from a governmental accountability office standpoint, if you were to look at how we wasted $1 billion and got nowhere on this interoperability of health records, isn't it that you had two large federal entities with both considered to be co-equals, with neither one in charge, and people in the middle, you know, trying to negotiate with them unsuccessfully? Does that characterize where we were?
Yes, I think that in the past situations, what we've seen historically is that when everyone is responsible, no one's responsible, and so I think that's what has led us to where we are today. Since we've had these subsequent interoperability initiatives, including the Integrated Electronic Health Records initiative between DoD and VA, and unfortunately, because of the lack of collaboration on the part of both departments, that's why we're here today.
So now what we have going is strengthen this IPO to hopefully move forward. I think you still have two big co-equals out there. I'm not sure that the results are going to be different. Wouldn't it be better to make a decision, whether by the Congress of the United States or preferably the executive branch, that would put one of these two players in charge, to say either it's DoD or VA, and the other player certainly is going to have input, but it's going to have to follow whatever. If DoD is the lead agency, then DoD is going to write this thing, and VA is going to have to follow, or vice versa. But I think to have this IPO with the expectation that these two big players, that life is going to be different, I'm not sure life is going to be different, and I worry that we're going to waste another $1 billion on this. And so I think to my colleagues, and would love to get your input on this, wouldn't it be better? I mean, if we look back, clearly, this would be, if either DoD or VA were in charge of this, and we're not co-equals, I think this would be done by now. I don't think we'd waste $1 billion. I'd love your input on that.
Well, I think that, number one, if the IPO continues the way that it is operating today, we are going to continue to have dysfunction in moving forward, and unfortunately, we want to prevent that. We have not done work on MHS Genesis, so I can't speak to the DoD side, and so I wouldn't be able to weigh in on whether DoD or VA should be taking the lead. I think that's something that the department should discuss as they define the roles of joint governance moving forward for their two implementation efforts. Perhaps Mr. Wyndham might have some perspectives as well, but I think that's something that the departments have to negotiate amongst themselves.
Mr. Wyndham?
Sir, I would offer that our governance is evolving. It's impossible to create a governance structure that handles all matters that may arise. As a matter of fact, we think we have a notional governance governance structure that is being tested through use cases as to how it would function and render decisions that you speak to. I think we are working through that process right now. Again, the mission set went from a JOV-dominated element for interoperability to now 2 EHRs that are going to make us interoperable. That's a new mission set. That's a new oversight responsibility, and I think we're working through those challenges, sir. And I think we will have a governance structure that works. And as you know, any business transformation typically involves challenges with governance. So we will continue to work that, sir. We understand.
So where I might disagree is, you said we will have a governance, it will evolve, and we will have a governance structure that will work. And I think, given the restraints that you're under, I think that that's pretty optimistic, and I think it's good. That's leadership on your part. However, that still doesn't define the fact that we don't have a lead agency in charge. I still think there's a role for the IPO with a lead agency in charge, but you know, I think we owe it to the taxpayers, we owe it to our active duty and our veterans to get this right. And I believe that we've got to define that somebody who's going to be the lead agency, one of these two, that's going to be the lead agency here. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I now yield 5 minutes to General Bergman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks everybody for being here. As I look at the timeline here on the documents presented, it kind of goes, you know, back to the future. January 2008, when Congress created the Interagency Program Office, I was still in command of the Marine Corps Reserve, and in April of 2009, when work on the virtual lifetime electronic record began, I was still in command. Okay, so I didn't really think about it in that depth until we're sitting here today and you look at how fast time flies. I'm not sure which goes faster, the time or the $1 billion out the door. Okay, the point is we cannot recover time ever. We as a committee, we as a Congress could, you know, put more money into a program. We can always do that, but is that the right answer for this committee, who, as you've heard said several different ways, works bipartisan? Are we throwing good money after the bad? And I guess what I am hoping for is to hear some level of testimony that instills confidence in us that we're not writing one check after another and dropping it into a black hole. Because in the end, what we're talking about is creating a health record when a young man or woman comes in to the military and having it be their final health record, if you will, when they are at the end of their time on this earth. Don't see it. So having said that, let's talk a little bit about, I'd like to hear from you, is some of the whys or not. In fact, I took a note that Mr. Wyndham, you said joint governance is evolving. Evolving, okay, there's a lot of things that evolve. Do you, or would any of you at the table be willing to venture a statement, making a statement as to, are you satisfied with the rate of evolution? Anybody could answer.
Sir, I'm very satisfied with the rate of evolution, and this is why I say it's evolving, is that the as-is state of the enterprise within VA is different than the as-is state of the enterprise within DOD. We've acquired the same commercial electronic health record, and now we're understanding the gaps between how we sought to implement and how DOD is implementing. And so those gaps have to be reconciled, and they have to be reconciled through governance. We've got site surveys that are ongoing that are discovering new things within the framework of the VA environment that have to be also taken in consideration. Our job is to deliver more capabilities than is presently being delivered within the VA, as is DOD's. We didn't buy a new system to implement the same thing. And so there is some cross-pollination. There is some hard work that has to be done.
Let me ask you a question,
yes, sir,
because I don't want you to run out my time with your
no
answer.
problem, sir.
Okay, And the point of this is we talk about vying, you got two big dogs vying for control in some ways of a project. What can Congress do? What can Congress do to set the stage for, I don't care if it's you agree in the joint governance that DOD is going to have it for the first year, and then you're going to do a handoff of the baton and hand it to the VA for the second year. Don't care, because as we evolve, the situation is still there. People in positions change. Is there something that Congress or through the Veterans Affairs Committee can actually do through the legislative process to actually jumpstart this evolution?
Sir, I think you did jumpstart it when you provided $782 million in the year of execution, FY18. And so we are very respectful of your investment in us. And so I think you have to let us.
Are you guys going to be able to then, as hopefully we'll, most of us will be back here to look you in the eye a year from now and get a accountability update as far as the where we are?
Sir, that's the only way I know how to do it. I spent 30 years in the military. Cost schedule performance objectives have been at the forefront of any program that I've worked in or led. And so I expect to be held to the same standard. So we look forward to giving you and presenting you with the data that supports our adherence and exceeding of cost schedule and performance objectives, or rationale of why we didn't. So we look forward to that scrutiny.
Well, the point is, I look forward to being here, and whether it be in the Technology Committee or whether it be in the Oversight and Investigation Committee, because we've got things moving to a small extent. And I see I'm over my time, and I yield back, but we need to keep the sense of urgency at all levels and moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We will now proceed to a second round of questioning, and I will begin. Mr. Wyndham, this is a diagram. Is it on the screen? Yes, okay. This is a diagram from your office depicting VA's committees, boards, and councils, and DOD's equivalents that oversee the EHR modernization. Can you please take a moment to explain what these are, what they do, and how they interact with each other?
Sir, I can't really see the screen, but I think I got the boxes memorized. So at the lower level, we've got technical and functional governance boards. Again, Dr. Thompson mentioned, for us governance to be successful, things have to be resolved at the lowest level. Okay, if everything has to be elevated to an executive council or a government integration board, then we're really not succeeding. So really it's the clinicians talking to the clinicians, the technicians talking to the technicians, and you see, other than the names being changed, we pretty much mirror on the VA side what DOD is doing in the name of T-SWAGs and other things. So really those 4 layers of governance that allow pass of resolution. Thank you. Now I got to put on my glasses. So the steering committee at the top is chaired by the DEPSEC. The Governance Integration Board, number 2, is chaired by me, and it's bringing together the CMO and the CTO for elements that they were unable to adjudicate at the lower level. And then 3 and 4 reflect the functional and the technical governing board that I indicated, chaired by the CMO and the CTO respectively. And then you have that lowest level of governance where we hope at the functional level and the technical level, which is number 5, things are really being resolved. The more we have to elevate, the less we are succeeding. There's absolutely no way. We will have thousands of governance elements. And I hope to, having risen to block number 1, only a handful for the executive levels like the DEPSEC and VHA and the CIO. Because again, that is going to be a slower, arduous process where things can get resolved in block number 5 at a more efficient, and those are the people that are being called upon to execute using the new EHR. And so, sir, that's that's an explanation of the left side.
Dr. Thompson, in the middle of the diagram, there's a box marked, quote, facilitated by IPO. Can you please explain what these boards are that the IPO facilitates, and how does your office do that?
These are the 3 boards that I mentioned that are not in place yet, but that we are proposing be put into place. a joint technical board, a joint functional board, and a joint decision board. The proposal is that the IPO serve as the executive secretariat for these boards as we serve in that capacity for other joint bodies. In that role, we would take responsibility for planning the meetings and developing the process and capturing decisions that are made at the meeting, ensuring that the artifacts are captured and that the decisions made at the meetings are communicated appropriately. So in effect, we would be managing the proceedings of these meetings, bringing together the appropriate people, the decision makers.
Could you elaborate on when they will be established?
We are in the final stages of formalizing a proposal to our Joint Executive Committee, which is co-chaired by the Deputy Secretary of the VA and the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness. It is our hope to be able to bring that before them for consideration in the near future.
What is the near future?
Within the next few months.
Okay. Ms. Harris, the middle portion of this diagram where the IPO coordinates between the DoD and VA has existed for some time. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. How well, Ms. Harris, has this structure performed in the past? And how well has the IPO been able to drive interoperability projects between the two departments?
The IPO, based on history, has demonstrated that they have not had the clout to be able to, again, mediate and resolve the issues between the two departments. So the performance of the IPO has been relatively lackluster. But that isn't to say there is an important role for the IPO. I mean, they play a critical role in identifying interoperability standards, and they certainly have a role to play in measuring the progress and performance of that interoperability between the two departments. So certainly there is a role for the IPO to play. However, based on what we see here, I mean, they are not acting as the single point of accountability, again, as called for by statute. So I think, one of the things, going back to one of the earlier questions of what Congress could potentially do, one thought for consideration would be to relieve the IPO of the legislative requirement to act as a single point of accountability. I think that, again, when you look at leading organizations, that single point of accountability should be at the executive level. And one of the things that strikes me when you look at this org chart, I mean, you count the number of boxes, there are at least 16 boxes here, which shows that accountability has been so diffused so that when wheels fall off the bus, there's no, you can't point to a single entity who's responsible, and that's a problem. And so again, focusing on a single point of accountability is critical in moving forward to make sure that interoperability is functional.
Thank you. My time has expired. I now yield 5 minutes to Ranking Member Lamb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Dr. Thompson, the proposal that you've laid out of the three bodies, you use the term executive secretariat. Do you agree with Ms. Harris that that's inconsistent with the statutory mission of IPO being a single point of accountability? Do you agree that those two things are not consistent with each other?
In practice today, we do not function as a single point of accountability. Our approach is collaborative in nature, to convene the decision makers of the departments and facilitate a decision in that way. And I do believe we've been very effective in doing that.
Okay, so you do agree then that the way you're functioning today and the way you would function under this proposal would not be consistent with the statutory objective of being a single point of accountability?
Not in regards to electronic health record modernization. We have served in that capacity in regards to moving forward interoperability and health data exchange.
Would your office be capable of fulfilling the statutory mission if given something that it doesn't have right now?
We would be more than willing to fulfill that role. We are not currently staffed or resourced to fulfill that function as I would envision it would need to be if we were to serve in that capacity.
And what is it that you would need in order to serve in that capacity?
We would likely need additional people to support the function.
Any idea how many people?
I would not want to take a guess at that. I'd be happy to take that for the record and get back to you.
Okay, I would appreciate that. Do you agree that under the proposal you've discussed here with the three bodies, it doesn't appear that in that proposal there is anyone who is an arbiter between DOD and VA, is that right?
There is not a single individual. Our approach is for all of these bodies to be co-chaired by a DOD and a VA decision maker.
Right, but there would essentially be an even number of votes.
There's not.
And if it was
there's not an
1-to-1.
individual who is a tiebreaker.
Right. Okay. Mr. Wyndham, are you aware of this proposal of the three bodies?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay. Any thoughts on how that could work?
Sir, I believe that the use cases that we've been running through this process have been yielding successes. So again, my commitment is extremely dynamic environment. We will continue to assess our governance structure to make it as efficient as we possibly can. And so at this point in time, I would offer, I think that is a very viable governance structure, sir.
So correct me if I'm wrong, I want to sum it up. Do I have it right that your view is basically that this is kind of being worked out on the fly day to day through the testing and examinations that you guys are doing, and you're raising issues to DOD as they come up? Is that a fair way of saying it?
I would say we started this governance discussion well over almost a year ago. And so as discoveries are made, this is being refined. Again, we're in
what is being refined, though? Because this proposal of the three bodies does not exist yet, as far as I can tell. So
no, which is one of the refinements that have been made is the need for these three bodies as we adjudicate issues between DOD and VA.
Right.
Again,
but right now that's not happening in any formal way. That's kind of what I'm asking. It seems like it's
not in a
happening
formal way.
on
You're correct, sir.
fly.
It
Okay.
is, and I guess I want to make a comment about the GAO's comments in Ms. Harris's comments, is that there's 16 boxes on there because there are a myriad of mission sets that there's no single body that is qualified from technical to clinical perspective. Our job is to manage those and have elevation opportunities through the GIB and through the Executive Council to resolve things that are unable to be resolved at the lowest level. I can't impress upon the committee enough is that governance has to be successful at the lowest possible level. Things can't rise to the superior level on every matter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. I yield 5 minutes to Dr. Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And a couple of things. Every member on this dais has been in the military. And we all understand the command structure. I understand that when I had my little 2 silver bars and then finally got a little Oakley, I would have to salute him every time because he had 3 stars. I got that. There's nobody that we have as a 3-star here. And what I think Mr. Kaufman is concerned with in his questioning, his concern is that we're going to have another Denver fiasco if we don't have somebody that the buck stops here. And we had a $600 million project end up being a $2 billion project. This would be a $40 billion if we triple the cost of this thing. So that's why it is absolutely critical, and Ms. Harris has said it over and over again, the private sector where I came from, whoever signed the check was in charge. They were the ones that were responsible either to the shareholders or to the partners in the group to make those decisions. And what I see coming here is we've got to get that worked out, whether it's someone from the executive branch or, and I would argue that the VA has different needs than the DOD does. Those are different systems. They serve different patients. And the VA system is gargantuan compared to what the DOD is doing. So I think that should be taken into consideration when you're working out this command or this guidance structure. So that's just my 2 cents worth on that. If we haven't learned anything today, I think we've learned that we're going to end up in a Denver if we don't decide where somebody, the buck stops. And Mr. Wyndham, I totally agree. Everything doesn't need to go to the boss. It needs to be somebody, like I said, at the provider's side to help them navigate this. They don't need to call you for that to find out how to get this button punched to get there. So I got that. One of the things that I would like to know, and I think it's critically important clinically, that you said that you, Mr. Wyndham, you said it was your intent to get to a single system, but there was no commitment to that. Are we committed to get off the legacy system and into this one single system?
Sure, I absolutely committed.
Okay.
The pivot strategy is an important piece of this. Again, I think everyone knows that we have to run these systems in parallel for a period of time. My job is to drive down the amount of time we have to run these systems simultaneously. That's taxpayers' money being expended. We want to move. IOC is critical. We're going to be assessing during IOC what things can be deployed sooner, what things can be deployed out of sequence to facilitate turning things off, sir, as you're alluding to. Absolutely, we want to pivot from the existing legacy systems to the new AHR, but we want to do it without disrupting care or introducing inefficiencies in the care of veterans. So we have to be judicious. Sir, I've heard you say a number of times the schedule won't drive us. We have to do what's right. We have to be committed to our veterans every step of the way, and that's what we're going to deliver to you is a pivot strategy and then execute to that strategy that, in fact, takes care of our veterans.
See, where I see where this is just my view, you have to listen to this today. Where I see the IPO is that when you go to Bremerton and to Madigan and you find out that the pharmacy's been slowed up and that they can pass that best, look, this is what happened when we rolled this out. This is what you shouldn't do, or this is what you should do to ramp up to avoid the slowdowns that occur. I don't think they need to be involved in every decision going on, but somebody, just like when Dr. Shulkin said we're going to use the Cerner system, one person made that decision. It was a gigantic decision, but when he took advice from a lot of people, but one person had to sit down and sign his or her name to that document so that you could get it done. And there needs to be a buck stops here person in this organization, I think, so that those things we learned in Spokane and Seattle, the IPO can pass all that information along very well, but I don't think they need to be, they need to be a flow of information and best practices, not the person that says, here, no, we're not going to do that. And there needs to be that person out there, so that backstop out there somewhere. I yield back.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just don't think this is doable. I think that we're going to undergo the same problem unless we change. And I get that we plussed up the IPO to try and make a difference. I just don't think it's going to make enough of a difference at the end of the day that we are going to be efficient in terms of resolving this issue of interoperability. I think we're going to waste more taxpayer dollars and getting to where we need to go. I think from day one, we made a terrible mistake. The prior administration, continued by this administration, in not saying to both of these major players, the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs, one of you is in charge and the other one can have input, and the IPO can certainly serve as a vehicle for that input. But by not doing that, we've created this consensus situation where we hope that it's going to get done, but we don't know that it's going to get done. And so I would hope that this committee would take a hard look at this organizational structure and say whether or not one of these two agencies ought to be in charge. They ought to be the lead agency, and then let's move forward from there. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
General Bergman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Thompson, you used a phrase that sent chills up my spine when the question was asked, what do you need? And it was more people. Okay, you didn't know how many, that's okay. But there's at least when I was spending my time in DOD, the answer that sent chills up a lot of spines then was the answer to every problem was give us more people, more money, more time, and we'll get you a solution. So, you know, the point is, I think we really, I don't care who does it, we need to get realistic with the fact that that is not an answer that is going to energize what it is we're trying to accomplish. Because when you add more people to a situation, you get a chart, an org chart that, as we've already kind of alluded to here, does not feel like it reports to anybody or anybody's in charge, and you waste a lot of time with reorganizing ourselves just because there's been a little change. But let me ask you a question. The GAO had previously recommended that the IPO have authority over budget and staff, over interagency processes, and over decision-making for interoperability in both departments. VA and DOD accepted the recommendations but never really implemented them. We know that. It seems that the IPO itself is not able to implement such recommendations. Is it a lack of authority to exercise more authority? Who can implement whatever recommendations are out there?
I joined the IPO in 2015. Those recommendations were made prior to my tenure with the IPO. So I can't speak specifically to the reasons why at that time those recommendations were not put into place. As we've been rechartered, we have a much smaller footprint, very much focused on health data standards and interoperability, and that's where we have been focused. If there's a decision made that the IPO should take on a different function, I think we would need to consider what it would take for us to perform that function. I don't believe today we are configured to support a single point of accountability as is being suggested here today. We would be happy to step into that role. I don't believe we're positioned for it properly today.
So let's say, for the sake of discussion, that we had folks like the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, AT&L, and ultimately maybe the Secretary of Defense, and maybe the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and the Deputy Secretary for Veterans Affairs. Do you think if we got them in a room, that they, knowing some of the personalities involved with that group, that they could come out with an org chart that would show a responsibility for what actions? I mean, do we have to leave it to the heads to send a wire diagram down, or I mean, can that actually be done at your level in a prioritized manner?
We would be happy to do that if that is asked of us.
Okay, so in other words, if basically told to do something, you'll do it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, I guess we need to figure out. Yeah. So, yeah, in fact, the doctor and I are practicing the Vulcan mind meld here, because my next question was, Ms. Harris, what do you think?
As currently chartered and resourced, the office would not be able to function as an effective means for joint governance. So things would have to change both in terms of staffing and resources. However, in addition, I think the root cause of why the IPO has been ineffective over the past decade is because it has had no authority or influence over the actions of the large and powerful organizations within DOD and VA that have responsibility for the department's electronic health record programs.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back the rest of my time.
Thank you. I have one final brief question, which I will ask, and then I will defer to my colleagues on the committee if they too might have a brief question before we conclude. Dr. Thompson, I recently visited the Seattle VA Medical Center, as you already know. I learned the personnel there had not been able to visit the nearby military health system facilities where Cerner has been implemented. It is my understanding, though, that they will now be permitted to do that. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Do any of my colleagues, Ranking Member Lamb, Dr. Rowe?
One very quick, Ms. Harris, as we discussed this governance structure, do you think there should be one person, one entity that where the buck stops?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you once again to our witnesses for your testimony. If there are no further questions, the panel is now excused. This afternoon, we have heard a great deal about leadership and governance. The VA needs leaders to establish the governance, but the governance must be enduring because individual leaders will come and go. Unfortunately, we have seen far too much of that turnover in the early months of this program. The IPO, or the Interagency Program Office, is one of the few aspects of EHR modernization that is mandated by law. That means that it has a very important and permanent role to play in governance. Most everyone here today agrees the IPO needs to do more. My hope is DoD and VA will hash out what that looks like and come to mutual agreement. I am willing to give them additional time to do that, but I will not wait forever. The key decisions that will determine EHR modernization's future and prospects for success are being made over the next several months. I am skeptical of Congress imposing solutions, but we also have to keep the train safe on the tracks. Thank you to all of you again for your participation in today's hearing. I'd also like to thank the staff for helping make this a very productive first hearing of this subcommittee. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. And without objection, so ordered. The hearing is now adjourned.